It was late. Too late to be driving alone, but I didn't have a choice. My friend's party had run longer than I expected, and I had an early class the next morning. The rain had started halfway through the drive, the kind of heavy, relentless rain that makes the road disappear under a sheet of water. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the GPS on my phone kept glitching, like it didn't know where I was. I was on a back road, one I didn't recognize, when I saw the first sign of life, a gas station up ahead. It was small, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked, but the lights were on, and I needed to stretch my legs. I pulled into the parking lot, the rain pounding on the roof of my car, and ran inside. The gas station was empty except for the cashier, an older man with a tired face and a name tag that read, Earl. He didn't look up when I walked in, just kept staring at a small TV behind the counter. The screen was fuzzy, like it wasn't picking up a signal, but he was watching it like it was the most interesting thing in the world. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Can I get a coffee?" He didn't answer, just pointed to a pot on the counter. I poured myself a cup, the smell of burnt coffee filling the air, and set it down in front of him. He still didn't look at me. How much?" I asked. He finally turned his head, his eyes meeting mine, and I froze. His eyes were completely white, like they'd been rolled back into his head. But he was looking at me, really looking at me. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I backed away, my heart racing, and bolted out the door. I didn't even bother paying. I just got in my car and drove, the rain coming down harder now, the wipers struggling to keep up. About 20 minutes later, I saw another light, a diner this time. It was one of those old-fashioned places with neon signs and a parking lot full of trucks. I pulled in, telling myself I just needed to calm down, to get my bearings. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The diner was packed, every booth and stool filled with people, but no one was talking. They were all just sitting there, staring at their plates. The air smelled like grease and something else, something metallic. I slid into a booth near the door, my hands shaking, and a waitress appeared almost instantly. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice flat. "Just a Coke," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded and walked away, her movements stiff and mechanical. I looked around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The people at the tables weren't eating. They were just moving their forks around, scraping them against the plates. The sound was unbearable, like nails on a chalkboard. The waitress came back with my drink, setting it down in front of me. I took a sip, and my stomach turned. It wasn't Coke. It was thick and bitter, like motor oil. I spat it out, the liquid staining the table, and looked up at the waitress. Her face was blank, her eyes empty. "You shouldn't be here," she said, echoing the gas station cashier. I stood up, knocking over the glass, and ran out of the diner. The rain was coming down in sheets now, the wind howling like it was alive. I got in my car and drove, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The third place I stopped was a motel. It was the kind of place you'd see in a horror movie. Flickering neon sign, peeling paint, in a parking lot full of potholes. But I was exhausted and the storm was getting worse. I told myself I'd just rest for a few minutes, maybe wait out the rain. The lobby was empty, the air thick with the smell of mildew. A bell sat on the counter, and I rang it, the sound echoing through the room. A man appeared from a back room, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Just for an hour or two," I said, my voice shaking. He nodded and handed me a key. "Room 13, end of the hall." I took the key and walked down the hallway, the carpet squishing under my feet. The door to room 13 was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open, my heart pounding. The room was small, with a single bed and a TV that looked like it hadn't been turned on in years. I sat down on the bed, the springs creaking, and closed my eyes. That's when I heard it, whispers, coming from the walls. I stood up, my heart racing, and pressed my ear to the wall. The whispers were clear now, voices overlapping, saying the same thing over and over. "You shouldn't be here." I grabbed my bag and ran out of the room, down the hallway, and out into the rain. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, the engine roaring to life. I drove and drove, the storm raging around me, until I finally saw the lights of my neighborhood. I got home and collapsed on the couch, my clothes soaked, my mind racing. I tried to tell myself it was just the storm, just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, I went back to the road, trying to find the gas station, the diner, the motel, but they weren't there. The road ended in a dead end, overgrown with trees and weeds, like it had been abandoned for years. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if those places were real or if I was just somewhere else. But I do know this: I'll never drive that road again, and I'll never forget the whispers. "You shouldn't be here.